we'll try to keep everybody's attention for what's been a really interesting day so far. I'm Jennifer Saperstein. I co-chair the anti-corruption practice at Covington and Burling. I'm based here in Washington, D.C., so I did not have to travel very far, unlike many people in this room. And very excited to moderate the panel on compliance and investigations using data and technology in compliance and investigations. And we've got an absolutely terrific panel here. We're going to talk all things data and technology for compliance and investigations. So before we dive in, I'm going to ask, we can just go down the row and I'll ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves.
Thank you. Hello everyone, I'm Shimo Tanaka. I'm SVP of Frontier USA, based in New York. Office is not part of it as well. And there, so we provide forensic and e-discovery service from here, especially for Japanese clients. And there, I manage sales, marketing, and also data scientist team in New York office. And we really appreciate Mr. Kamizu for this opportunity, and I'm very excited to be here. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Vince Walden. I'm CEO of Kona AI. We are a compliance and technology software platform that corporations use to monitor for anti-corruption, anti-fraud, sanctions, and trade compliance. As background, I was a consultant in the Big Four accounting firms most of my professional career, and then recently, only about a year and a half ago, became CEO of this software startup where we've automated a lot of the traditional tests and algorithms into the software. As background, I do a lot of work with the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, and I was CFE of the Year last year for a lot of the anti-fraud and testing research that we've done through MIT and Harvard Business School. And I'm very glad to be here and share some of the technology ideas that we're working on.
Hi everyone, my name is Sydney Bashako. I'm a partner in the White Collar Defense and Investigations Group at Davis Polk, based in New York. We do a lot of government investigations, internal investigations, as well as a lot of compliance work, both in conjunction with investigations and proactive compliance assessments and reviews and helping companies build and improve their compliance programs. Really glad to be here with all of you and excited to be on this panel. Thanks for coming.
Hi, my name is Yuichi Ikeda. I'm a partner in the PwC Japan forensics team, and I'm leading especially the forensic technology team, as well as the sort of PwC Japan's corporate level data and analytics team. And I'm really excited to be here and talk to this panel. Thank you.
Okay, so before we dive into the questions, I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes level setting on use of data and what we're hearing, particularly from the Department of Justice, although everybody who's been in the room all day got to hear from Glenn and from Matt directly. I think we heard from Glenn this morning that the through line from all of the DOJ policy announcements that are coming out right now, compliance is that through line. And we heard both from Glenn and from Matt how much emphasis the department's placing on the use of data analytics, both for their own use in terms of figuring out where there's misconduct and where they can find cases, but also for companies. And so we've heard quite a bit today about the DOJ Criminal Division's guidance on the evaluation of corporate compliance programs. As we all know, it's an important document that provides guidance to prosecutors evaluating corporate compliance programs in the context of specific criminal investigations. But it's also a really useful resource for companies, even companies that are not under investigation, as to what DOJ expects a best-in-class compliance program to look like. And that guidance document includes a subsection on data resources and access that specifically asks whether compliance and control personnel have sufficient direct or indirect access to relevant sources of data to allow for timely and effective monitoring and or testing of policies, controls, and transactions. And you see that expectation around access to data for compliance personnel reflected not only in the DOJ compliance guidance, the criminal division's compliance guidance, but it's also started being included in deferred prosecution agreements and non-prosecution agreements in the attachment that talks about corporate compliance and the commitments a company makes with respect to compliance. You're starting to see some of that same linkage around access to data. There's other questions in the DOJ compliance guidance that underscore the importance of data in a compliance program. There's a question in the risk assessment section around whether a company's periodic risk assessment is limited to a snapshot in time, or whether it depends on continuous access to operational data and information. In the section on continuous improvement testing and review, the guidance asks what testing of controls, collection and analysis of compliance data, again, we see this reference to data, and interviews of employees and third parties the company is undertaking. And so you see this emphasis on data throughout the guidance. And recently, in the FCPA settlement with Albemarle, which you heard about earlier from Glenn and from Matt, the company received credit for its extensive and timely remedial measures, which included the use of data analytics to monitor and measure the compliance program's effectiveness. I just learned from Vince that Kona AI was part of that, so hopefully we'll be able to speak to that later. Did not know that when I wrote these remarks. And so it's clear that DOJ is really focused on this, but apart from DOJ expectations, there are a lot of use cases for analytics as well. Data can improve the quality of risk assessments, can be a force multiplier for investigations and for audit and testing exercises, can help companies optimize things like their third-party diligence and monitoring processes by, you can use data to facilitate your risk rankings and segmentation. And so we have this terrific panel today who can talk to you about some of the use cases for data analytics, the way they have really practical tips, tools, technology, things that they've seen companies do. And so I think it's going to be a terrific last panel. So I am going to jump right in with a question, sticking with the compliance theme, although we are going to talk about investigations too. How are machine learning and other advanced analytics being used to improve compliance programs? Sydney, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure, happy to start. So I think, first at a high level, when you think about what companies are doing with machine learning, data analytics, and AI, I think kind of as Jennifer alluded to at the outset, there are expectations on companies that don't do something with the data that they have access to. And particularly if companies are using data analytics and machine learning and AI in their business, I think the expectation from DOJ and other regulators is probably that they're trying to incorporate it into their compliance programs as well. And one area where I think it's important to think about this is, the more sophisticated data analytics get and the more sophisticated AI gets with respect to what the business is doing with it, the more compliance has to kind of keep up pace. And compliance, it almost has to be more sophisticated than what the business is using because they want to stay ahead of it and they want to catch mistakes the business is making or problems that they're having. So just, when you're stepping back and thinking about your business and its risks, I think that's one thing to really keep at top of mind. And I think it's not really a one-size-fits-all approach. You really have to think about what your company's risk profile is. There's not really like an off-the-shelf program for data analytics. The key is really to make sure you're thinking about your risk profile, make sure you're thinking about what regulators would consider to be your risk profile, and then that you're tailoring your compliance program and tailoring the data that you're collecting and the data that you're analyzing appropriately for that. You'll want to think about any metrics that could help you track and document how the program is working, while also measuring compliance, detecting and preventing misconduct. That can include more basic metrics that you already track, like training completion rates, and then it can also include things like implementing AI programs to help you achieve the company's goals. So just as an example, there are AI programs that can help measure the extent to which employees are abiding by anti-corruption and anti-bribery policies. They can monitor emails for indicators like unusual spikes in communication after business hours, or with external parties that can help companies to effectively detect and investigate potential misconduct. These programs can also be trained to look for specific types of misconduct, like gifts and entertainment kickbacks. They can look at models for pricing and fees and for communications with competitors. And I think, before we start talking about kind of more specifics, another big picture thing I think to keep in mind is as your company transitions to relying more and more on data analytics and on machine learning, it's important to also think about whether you have a team who's trained and who's equipped to keep up with it. And sometimes this requires a little bit more subject matter expertise. So just, making sure that your team is trained on the system, make sure they're thinking about why certain things are being flagged, why it's important that those things have come to their attention, and what needs to happen before an alert can be flagged.
Vince, you want to add to that?
Sure. Sydney, I really like what you said about starting with the risk assessment. I get asked so many times, hey Vince, we want to use machine learning. We want to use AI. I've been said, people look at me and they say, hey, Kona AI, you're an AI company. No, I'm not. I'm a fraud prevention and detection company that uses AI. AI by itself and machine learning by itself doesn't do anything unless it solves a problem. And so starting back with your risk assessment, where do we have risks? Is it corruption? Is it sanctions and trade compliance? Is it fake vendor schemes? If you think about your business, you have customers, you have vendors, and you have employees. That's it. If you think about all who you pay and how money is going through, and let's put cyber on the side for a minute, because that's government or external players. But your accounting system and where money is being traded, vendors, customers, and employees. That's what you need to think about monitoring in the context of your risk assessment. And the good news is, nowadays with technology, it's not that hard and it's not that expensive. The price, it used to be hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, to implement global compliance monitoring. Now it can be done for the world's largest companies, again, hundreds of billions of dollars, for less than $500K a year, less than $250K a year. So from a regulator's perspective, there is absolutely no excuse in the eyes of the DOJ, I would say. Again, I'm not the DOJ, so I can't say, but there's no excuse for not having some type of monitoring. If you are a company with hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars in payments, and you're not monitoring those transactions for risk of whatever it is based on your risk assessment, and you say we don't have the budget, you are in hot water with the regulators if something bad ever happens. And again, so it's not for everybody. Small companies probably don't, but if you're dealing in the hundreds of millions of dollars or the billions of dollars of global payments and disbursements between customers, vendors, and employees, then you probably need to think about this. And like I said, it's not that expensive, and with the machine learning tools, the ability to have a program that is continuously evolving and improving is, I think, what's best practices and what the guidance is. You don't have to be day one all integrated with the entire corporation and have everything perfect day one. When I think about the companies that we started, and Jennifer, the companies we worked on in the past, we started with 2 countries, demonstrated success, and then added more over time, It's a journey. A friend of mine, Tom Fox, who does a lot of compliance podcasts, he considers, he says, compliance is a business process. Compliance is not an audit. Internal audit is internal audit. Compliance is not audit. Compliance is a business process that should be looked at as a continuous monitoring kind of platform that needs to be monitored and measured. And there's that old saying that says you can't monitor what you can't measure. And data analytics is basically the lifeblood of how you measure an effective compliance program. So that's kind of that thing. We'll dive into machine learning later, but I think that kind of is the kind of the theme. Anybody else want to comment? Great, nobody remarks. I get fired up on this stuff.
No, I think this is really helpful level setting when we think about proactive use of data analytics and compliance programs. I also want to make sure we do some level setting around the use of data in investigations and analytics and investigations. And one question I hear a lot is, are the technology tools the same? I mean, some of the tools you heard about from Vince, from Sydney, are we also using those in investigations, or are we looking at different tools? And so Shiho, maybe you can start
Yes,
in
thank you.
investigations.
In the investigation, especially for email and chat data communication, we use technology-assisted review. That is, as she mentioned, the same category of technology we utilize for compliance matters. So first, technology-assisted review that is called PAR is not generative AI. It's not like similar to ChatGPT. So with technology-assisted review, documents are prioritized from non-relevant to relevant based on the training data. And that makes lawyers or outside counsel to review that document faster and effectively, and then save the cost and time more. And this, in addition to that part, technology-assisted review, one of the example of analytics tool in investigation is communication mapping. The map shows that communication among people, especially related to that topic in that investigation. So that really helpful that lead lawyers to think about potential custodian and also prioritize that.
I'm going to turn, Yuichi, do you want to jump in next and I'll come back to you, Sydney?
Sure. So I guess the little bit of history about using technology in the investigation. I've been doing this since probably 2005, and I've seen the evolvement of the technology around the forensic technology. And yes, we use a lot of analytics in the investigation, but also when we apply the usage of analytics or the technology assisted review, we always ask questions to always communicate with the attorneys who work together with us. So the goal is to find the evidence to the investigation or for the matter. And we always have the limit, like a time limit. We also have a budget. And the application of those new technology is to solve the problem or find the evidence in a very efficient manner or without spending too much cost. So if the project is simple, we can simply apply the keyword searching and then maybe identify the documents or the messages that may be directly connected to the matter. But when we're talking about hundreds of custodians sometimes, and then it is extremely difficult to go through massive amount of documents in a very short period of time. So in such case, we basically consider to apply the technology assisted review or the analytics, people analysis, to identify or pinpoint where is the location or who is the people who might potentially have the evidence to the matter. So for us to get from point A to point B, basically to find the evidence as fast as possible, the new technology will be the key to reach the goal in a efficient manner or as soon as possible and without spending too much cost.
Can I add one comment to that too? And again, because email traditionally and unstructured data has always been the #1 go-to for attorneys and and just e-discovery professionals. Just show of hands. Can you pay a bribe with email? Can you pay a bribe with email? How do you pay a bribe? You pay it with money, right? You don't pay it with email. You can talk about it in email. Email is very important. But at the end of the day, you pay bribes, you commit fraud through transactions. It's got to move through the money system somehow. And again, that's where the forensic accounting comes in. It's very important. The same concepts around technology-assisted review for email, which is huge. You know, when you find hot documents, show me more like this. That's what technology-assisted review is. So when you find that friend fee, no one calls it bribe expense, but they call it friend fee, special payment, miscellaneous expense, charity, whatever. When you find those, hey, find me more like this. It's technology-assisted review, same concept. Doing them together, that's magic. And I know both your firms, when you can combine both structured data and unstructured data together, you have a full picture. But remember, you can't pay bribes with email. You can talk about it, but you can't pay it. And you need to have that forensic accounting view.
Cindy, I'd love to get your perspective from the outside counsel perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So from the outside counsel perspective, we have used technology-assisted review in a number of different matters, and it is phenomenal. It's every time we've used it, it's saved a lot of money. It's gotten great results. You know, it's interesting. Your team spends the time sort of training the system, and so you do some review. You identify the documents that are relevant or responsive or hot or interesting, and so they spend time training the system, and then the system sort of, you know, starts to learn what to spit back to you. And we've used it we've used it for internal investigations. We've used it in government-facing investigations. You know, I would say 5 or 6 years ago, it was a little more difficult to get buy-in from the, you'd have these conversations where you would try to explain to them what you were using, and, you know, it used to be, I think, a little more difficult. They were kind of accustomed to talking about custodians and search terms and hit counts. And this is a little bit of a different conversation, but I think as time goes on, sort of depending on who you're dealing with, they're more accustomed to having these types of conversations and more open to it. I know we're talking about investigations, but it's a very similar thing on the compliance side of things. I also have a number of clients who are using something similar for their surveillance and monitoring capabilities. You know, one big topic with the SEC and CFTC right now in the US are these off-systems communications matters. And essentially, companies, mostly financial institutions, that are subject to record-keeping requirements are being fined truly enormous amounts because people are texting. And it's not because they're like texting that they're bribing people or texting that they're engaging in insider trading. Like, it's just that they're texting and they're being fined $200 million because people are texting. And the SEC and the CFTC have made very clear that they expect these institutions to be surveilling and monitoring for their employees engaging in, you know, what they call off-systems communications. And it's hard to monitor for. You know, typically these programs use things like keyword searches or lexicons, and so you look for words like text me or WhatsApp or WeChat, and that can be fine, but, you know, some of our clients are global and their employees in Asia, for example, all have WhatsApp in their signature blocks because they have corporate WhatsApp accounts, which they're allowed to use. But then when we use WhatsApp as a keyword, you get everyone's emails because it's in their signature blocks. And so there's a similar, you know, I think it's like the equivalent of TAR, but for surveillance, where you can feed the program emails that are indicative of people signaling that they want to take things off from email and into text and into WhatsApp, and then the system learns kind of what types of other emails to identify that use that same kind of language, and it's a much richer data set than we found with just simple keywords or lexicons.
Joanna.
Can I add something? So this is a recent conversation that I had with the client. This might be a good, interesting example of the application of the analytics or the monitoring of the emails and communications or the monitoring of the transaction that Kona AI does. So this client came from the area that it's an auto parts company. So they were investigated by DOJ about 10 years ago. So they are very keen on monitoring their emails because all the evidence for the antitrust investigation, a lot of evidence came from the email communication with the competitors or some people involved in it. So they know that, they were aware that they need to monitor emails, and then they've been doing that. But when they have started having issues outside of the operations in Japan, outside of Japan, meaning that they have the concern about the anti-corruption issues, and then they basically came to me said, okay, we need to start doing some monitoring for FCPA or anti-corruption issues. So how can I start? Can I just start monitoring emails? But the thing is, like, when they, where they came from is the email monitoring for anti-corruption, antitrust, but for the anti-corruption, those evidence might not appear on the emails. I don't think that people send an email to the government official say, hey, I want to pay you a bribe, so can we meet at the restaurant at this time? So we don't find those emails, but those records might appear on the transaction side of it. So the bribe can be paid through the outside consulting person, or the maybe there could be a very large amount of money was spent on stationery or something like that. So I explained to the client saying, hey, maybe for anti-corruption purposes, it might not be that effective to go through the emails or monitor emails or chat, but instead you might want to take a look at the transactions instead. So there's I guess movement in Japan finally that those people, like companies, start paying attention to the monitoring, but we have to educate them to what will be the effective monitoring, what's the effective way of application of the new technology to their monitoring or the surveillance. So that might be an interesting topic.
That's a really interesting and really good point, and sort of sticking with that theme around challenges and education of companies. Are there limitations that Japanese companies or companies operating in Japan have to consider when they're using these new technologies? I'll stick with you, Yuichi.
Oh, okay. So a lot of the tools that we use for the investigation have been invented in the US or the UK, right? Basically that non-Japanese environment, basically English environment. So all those tools behaves around the Japanese language is very different. So for example, like tool like BrainSpace, I think it's getting very popular in the US among the investigators and maybe attorneys. But that doesn't mean that it behaves perfectly around the Japanese language. So when I did the research about the tools, like how it behaves around the Japanese language, the result was a little difficult because it used the AI and everything, but it still needs to understand the word. But it basically cannot, for example, it cannot recognize the Japanese words accurately. It means that it cannot tokenize the Japanese language properly. Means that that's gonna affect the accuracy of the analytics. So some like US attorneys that we work with wants to use the BrainSpace for investigation, but I say let's look at the accuracy, like how effective it is to use those analytics in the Japanese language. So we have to sort of educate those attorneys before using the tool, as it does not work as good as on the Japanese language compared to English. So that's one of the topics that we might consider using those new technologies in Japanese environments.
Shiva, do you want to add to that?
Sure. So there are a lot of challenges for Asian language, including Japanese, because that need extra consideration. Usually, due to that complex legal system, as Yuichi mentioned already. And from Theo recognized that developing accurate and effective AI model for CGT language requires extensive linguistic and cultural knowledge and pose a unique challenges too. So one of that thing is, as Yuichi mentioned, tokenization. So accuracy of search as well and analyze is fully influenced by the quality of tokenization that is called wakachigaki in Japanese. Poor tokenization can result in inaccurate search result and misinterpreted in text and in incorrect data processing. So to understand those challenges and to have a good technology that is specifically tailored for CJK language is very, very important thing, as well as having the good quality for that AI model in English too.
Thank you. One question, Vince, you already mentioned this, but I also often get the question from clients, where do I start with data? There's so much out there. If you're a compliance professional, you may not have access to everything your sales and marketing and finance people are looking at, which is a question DOJ will be asking. And you started to cover this earlier, Vince, but maybe you can expand on it a bit. For a company that wants to start using data analytics in its compliance program or in its investigation processes, or just wants to enhance what they're already doing, where do you recommend a company start? You talked about pilot programs and risk assessments earlier, but maybe you can expand on that a bit for anyone looking for practical tips.
Sure, the risk assessment, and as for compliance professionals, similar to internal audit professionals, we're asked to do enterprise or risk assessments. It's in the DOJ guidance. It's in for internal audit and accounting folks. They have the COSO fraud risk management guide. Both say you must do a risk assessment, which generally means show me a heat map. If you don't know what a heat map is, you should look up what a heat map is. It's basically a discussion or surveys or gathering data amongst your company, your organization that shows how likely are risks or events to happen, and when they do happen, what's the impact? Because that's the starting point. And so for those things that are highly likely to occur, and when they occur, it's bad, on a scale of 1 to 5, or however you want to do it. There's all sorts of guidance to set those up. Plot your risks, and you'll find, heaven forbid, if you haven't done it, if your program is low in maturity, you're going to find that you're doing your internal audit and your teams, you're doing lots of tests around things that don't matter very much. And that's bad, because if you have, the first thing that I hear when you're being investigated, in fact, you might, probably because counsel might have better perspectives on this, is that the DOJ is going to ask, or the regulator is going to ask, show me your risk assessment process, or how did you assess risk, and could you have found this? And if you say, well, we don't have a risk assessment, we don't know where our risks are, strike one, that's bad. And strike two is if you don't have a process, again, compliance is a business process, that tracks that, that could be dangerous for you. Because again, you're going to want to show those highest risk areas, whether it's corruption or it's insider threat or cyber or whatever it is, you should be able to then design tests and controls that map to those highest risk areas. And if you're doing a whole bunch of tests that don't matter, like there's small things, for risks that you deem as low impact and low frequency, that's a problem if you're missing the big things. And that's really an important thing to look at. So that's when, starting with the risk assessment, that's where you go and then say, all right, what do I need? What data sources do I need, either internally or externally? What data sources do I need to bring transparency into that high risk? If it's corruption, is it corruption around your distributors, which is the order to cash process? Or is it corruption around your vendors and third parties, which is procure to pay? Again, forgive me for it's the accountant in me. but those are two separate systems. So that means the email and the custodians is that your sales force and the distributors, or is that your procurement department? So these are the things that you want to ask that are different and unique based on your risk assessment. So we can get all sorts of fancy with analytics, but if you don't solve a problem that matters, like an important risk, then why bother? And so that's my long answer to how you think about where to start.
Other thoughts from the panel?
Yes, I would like to jump in, and I totally agree to have that risk assessment first. And first, of course, companies should find a good forensic provider to have enough experience of data analytics and also have a skillful data scientist in-house to support. And so thinking of like data analytics as a singular workflow, but after narrowing down the document with search term and other methods, we do random sampling, usually 1,000 to 2,000 to pick up the document that is random sampling to see what is the data set like. Then we can estimate that what is the entire data set is like with the random sampling. So we always use richness. Richness means how much relevant documents are there in that data set. So with the random sampling, we can know that how much richness is here, and we can estimate how much relevant document could be in the entire data set. So that is one of that third to see what is the data like. And we can use metrics and statistics, and with those training data, like random sampling data. Then we can start from here to do that data analytics usually.
Can I ask one comment on piggybacking on that? That's great. One of the things to eliminate false positives that really is a game changer that all of us use. I know PwC uses it. This concept around risk scoring. So one of the ideas is, from a transactional point of view, and even perhaps even document review, but don't just focus on one risk. Show me the transactions that are hitting multiple risk criteria. So in fact, the whole, the premise around the forensic data analytics nowadays is come up with your risk assessment, design your 15, 20, in my case, 100 tests. Now, the fact that if it hits one test, all right, big deal. But show me out of 1,000 or 100,000 invoices or payments, show me the payment that was paid out to a vendor that had no due diligence, that was a round dollar amount indicative of cash, that had a suspicious keyword that made it look suspicious, that was booked to a charity account, that was paid before it was invoiced, yada, yada, yada. Show me that transaction. That's a lot more interesting than just one test. And so this concept around risk scoring, and the same works with documents. Don't just show me the one that hit one keyword hit. Show me the documents that hit multiple keywords to a high-risk custodian at midnight on a weekend. Show me that one. I want to read that email. And so that concept of stacking your risk criteria is a way to prioritize. I've taken, I think our largest one is what? We've taken $60 billion from a large energy company, resorted and organized over 500,000 invoices, purchase orders, and payments, and sorted them, and we went and looked at the top 10. And you better believe, in the top 10, there are some very interesting transactions that hit lots of multiple criteria for them to be the top 10 out of 500,000. So that concept of risk scoring can be very powerful and save a lot of time and money, because then you don't have to go and review transaction number 60,220. No, just review the top 10, top 20. And if all top 20 are suspicious, then you've got bigger problems. You better probably review a couple more. But if you don't see anything, or if it looks pretty good, you could stop. And so that's how do you kind of manage the large to get started? Putting things in context on a reasonable risk-based approach can save a lot of time and money.
Just gonna open it up. Anyone else from the panel wants to jump in?
Okay, well, completely agree with the Vincent's ideas. We also provide the risk-based analytics to the clients that for example, had the anti-corruption issues in the past. So this particular client had the issue with the third parties. They had a serious issue with the third parties. So they want us to invent the analytics to basically come up with the list of vendors which has the suspicious activities. So basically, we built the analytics based on the exact model that you just mentioned. So it's a risk scoring model that those vendors which has a lot of suspicious transaction basically gets the higher score, and then it's going to escalate to the higher level so that we can basically have the client to look at this top 10 suspicious vendors, and then they can look at the emails transaction, they can look at the who's in charge of those vendors, and then they can eventually find out that there was the very suspicious thing was going on with those vendors. So that's a very, very powerful model that we can use for the analytics.
If PwC is doing it, then that's standard, that's good. Validating the thing.
Just I'm gonna stick with our two accountants for a minute and ask, the concept of risk scoring makes a lot of sense. It aligns with DOJ guidance and lots of other guidance. Everything about a compliance program probably should be risk-based. But where do you start with the data? Like to get, okay, here's our top 10 and $60 billion worth of transactions, and many companies, particularly those that are acquisitive, you don't have one ERP system, you don't have one order to cash, you don't have, maybe your order to cash, your ERP system's not talking to your diligence system. You mentioned they haven't gone through diligence, and so, I certainly work with a lot of companies that are interested when they get the question of like, where do we start? How do we even get to the point that we can run a bunch of tests to do our risk ranking and segmentation? So I welcome both actually all perspectives. I know the accountants will be excited about this one, but
there's no solution.
Where do we start, right? It's this one unique thing that we can start is like, as Vincent mentioned, like we have to, to do the scoring, like risk scoring, we have to have like a series of, analytical modules. So for example, one interesting analytics that we used was the address analysis, which was one of the criteria that the client was pretty impressed at, about the results. So this can be applied only within an area where the Google Map or Street View works. And we got a bunch of like vendor addresses, like registered addresses, and applied to the analytics that basically one of the dashboards that we created shows the street view of the particular vendor. And some vendors registers as the warehouse or shipment companies, but the street view actually shows it's just a shack in the middle of nowhere, even though it says shipment company. There's no trucks, no warehouse, anything. So a lot of those companies' clients basically makes a judgment based on only the corporate registry or just the information, like insufficient amount of information to basically register as their suppliers. But when we look at the details like the addresses or the who those vendors can be related or to the employees, that happens a lot in Southeast Asia, for example. So we basically start from like those things that we can basically take on easily, to start doing analytics. And then we can eventually, so when we want to analyze the transactions, like the payment or the approval process and everything, then we can basically ask the client to see, do you have this data? Do you have that data? And then we can start building the modules to create the risk scoring systems. Yeah, that's how we can start.
And let me add, because let me answer that question in the context of proactive monitoring, and let me answer it in the context of reactive investigation when you're often involved. And in the proactive world, let's just say your company is a global organization. You've got different accounting systems in all parts of the world. So Europe's got their own separate system. Brazil and Latin America has got their system. China is their system. Japan's got their system. None of them talk, right? And it's, where do you go? And again, going back to that risk assessment, well, we have most of our whistleblower complaints or issues in Latin America. Maybe we'll start there, and let's look at that. And let's look at the documents, and let's look at the transactions there. So that's proactively, you do that, and then you get some wins, and you actually find hidden money, and you recover a couple $100,000 or a couple $1 million again, and say, hey, that was great, we just paid for ourselves. Now let's go to Europe. Now, interestingly, many companies, and I think more and more Japanese companies especially, have been moving towards data warehouses. And that is my light, that's the saving grace for us. When people have multiple ERP systems, again, don't just think it's a problem for compliance, it's a problem for the business. And so IT, your CIO, has been undergoing major initiatives to get all those systems, those 5 different systems, to talk to each other in a data warehouse. And when you have a data warehouse, great, we can pull it. And that's that single instance. So it was bad 10 years ago. It was bad, it was hard 5 years ago, but I'm actually seeing more and more companies move to a central data warehouse where you can get that global view. So that's a good piece of news. Reactively, gosh, remember some of these investigations we've all done. Reactively, your host. If you haven't spent the money to proactively integrate your systems now, you can't tell the regulators, oh, sorry, that's too hard. You have to then put a team out to Brazil, you have to put a team out to Europe, you got to hire PwC, you got to put the teams out, you got to hire Davis Polk or Covington, you got to put the teams out all over the world. And yes, you'll be generating about, well, I'm not even going to say how much money you're going to be spending to do that, but you're going to have to do that, and it will be very painful. So that's, in reactive, you don't have a choice, you have to get it. At least that's been my experience. Any comments or anything? Is that?
No, I completely agree. No, I think it's all really important points for everyone to think about.
I mean, you can be efficient. These guys are the best. So you can be efficient at it. I'll plug you on that one, for sure. But human time and capital, gosh, we've done enough of these over the years. It's just sad. You feel sorry for the company sometimes. They're just like, dang it, they just would have had some better controls in place.
Well, also, there's so much data out there. Like, every year there's more and more data. So, even in instances, and there are, I think, many instances, reactively and proactively, you still need human resources, or compliance departments would go away. I think they still need the human resources in compliance departments, but tools that help human resources get to the relevant data much faster are just critical. And we heard earlier about the M&A safe harbor policy and the 60-day limit. I mean, as policies come out of DOJ that put a premium on acting quickly, that need to get to the relevant things quickly only intensifies. Vince, earlier you mentioned, and we can come back to the safe harbor policy, but Vince, you mentioned earlier, you talked a bit about AI, and I'll open this up to the panel. What are you seeing in generative AI, ChatGPT, and how can this technology impact compliance professionals?
Yeah. There's so much talk about generative AI and ChatGPT, and I'm not going to go into all the great things about ChatGPT because you've probably already heard them. Great content generation, you can come up with policies. It's a great first use of first drafts, but remember, you own that paper, and the facts in ChatGPT will come up with its own facts and its own case studies. And we all laughed at the lawyer who did the citing, or we didn't laugh, we rolled our eyes and said, oh my God, when the fake citing around the case came. But let me change gears here. Again, ChatGPT uses what's called an LLM, which is not a law degree. It's not that's an attorney joke. It's large language model, which is basically the internet or whatever they use to index it. But I'm experimenting with something called, and again, this is my own term, it's not really a term, But instead of an LLM, large language model, I'm using an LTM, which is a large transaction model. What if I point a ChatGPT type bot to accounting data? No one's really playing with that right now, but guess what? It actually works. If anybody has ever used Tableau or Power BI or any type of visualization tool to use data, my prediction in the next 6 months to a year, because if I'm working on it, there's probably, PwC is probably light years ahead. If I'm working on it, there's 200 other people working on it. But we will not be clicking on our Power BIs or Tableaus anymore. In the next 6 months to a year, we'll be interacting with a chatbot. I've got a really cool prototype on my website of what it's going to look like, because I'm building it now. But instead of, I'm going to look at my transactions and it's going to say, "Hi Vince, I've identified 10 high-risk transactions. What would you like to do?" Email them to you, show you the transactions, zoom in on the transactions. "Oh, show me the transactions." And the bot tells Power BI to zoom in on the transactions and navigate it. You're not clicking the mouse. And what's cool about that, and everybody thinks that AI, it sounds hard and complex. For a user, it is super easy. It's going to be great. I'm super excited about this because it's going to allow you to use your professional judgment to do advanced searches. Show me any ask the chatbot, show me any transactions in Argentina with the word training in it from this date to this date range, and yada, whatever you want. It's going to then convert that into SQL. And instead of going and filtering and trying to get it, it's just going to go get it for you. Whatever you can think, it's going to go get. That's exciting, and that's when when I say AI, I'm not an AI company. I'm just a fraud detection guy, a compliance software guy who uses AI to make life easier. And those are the things that has me really excited. So mark my words, you're going to be using a chatbot in the next, I don't want to say 6 months, within the next 12 months, you'll no longer be clicking in Tableau. That's my prediction. And it's not going to be me. I mean, it might be me if you buy my software, but it's going to be, we're all going to be using it. We just don't know it yet. That's my AI thing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We actually have a client who's using a chatbot to ask questions about required disclosures in connection with personal trading.
Wow.
And other uses of AI that I've heard about recently from clients, really sort of in like the process optimization space. So one example is, for regulated entities that are subject to a lot of different rules kind of all over the globe, it's usually a very manual human process to keep track of all the rules, keep track of when they're changing. You can easily miss a rule change in some jurisdiction and then you don't change your policy appropriately. There's AI now that can track all of those rules, can track, make sure that they're mapped onto your policies and your controls and really catching those things in real time and things that would take human beings just, hundreds and thousands of hours and just much more of an opportunity for missing something.
Wow.
It's a good segue into a question that I'd like to pose to the entire panel, which is, we've already gone down this road. What are some success stories you've seen companies and their compliance or investigations teams achieve using data analytics? Shuhami, let's start with you.
Sure.
Just go right down the line.
So we have supported a lot of Japanese, US companies, compliance case, investigation case, and litigation case, of course. And most of the case, we can utilize AI there, not only prioritize the document, but to eliminate non-relevant document because of the relevance, or assist QC as well. So we support a lot of DOJ compliance email monitoring with law firm too. And one success story we have seen was one of that Japanese company. Actually, it was like Japanese company subsidiary here, but they could avoid probation because of that support in AI email monitoring. So it was really like good story for the company, and especially there, one of the highlight is for the training data. So that the training data is very important for the AI monitoring, but especially for the compliance use, most of the case or often can be found is we can utilize that training data to the different case means like on the next case on the following year. So that creates the cycle of data analytics for their part. So that is very like good success story for that email monitoring. But I agree about the other opinion that email monitoring is not enough to find every evidence first. So that's why email monitoring or chat monitoring or the investigation can be one of the options for the compliance matter. And we can get the trigger, and from here we can go to that different investigation for the scene transaction or other PC log. But those combination, and especially like our professional forensic engineer, they can see the story from that log and also like the trend between the conversation with custodians. So that lead the best practice for the investigation and also compliance to the success story as well.
Cool. I'll go, since we're going down the line here, I'll give 2 examples. I always like to think there's 2 ways to think about compliance monitoring. There is make the business better, improve the business performance, and keep the business out of trouble. So my first story is a very simple one. $185,000 investment, got the company $6.5 million in recoveries in about 2 months. Done. You can't argue that. The CFO was quite happy with that. It's a good return on investment. Made the business better, and found a lot of internal control, segregation of duty settings. But they got money, so that's success story. The keep you out of trouble
I
story.
interrupt you to ask, got money, say more about how we got money.
Improper payments, yeah.
Okay.
It was, how much money goes to miscellaneous vendor, named miscellaneous vendor / cash. That was the name. And
So they could shut down that account.
And they shut that down.
Okay.
And they, bypassing due diligence, and that was just the way. Now, and again, that was just the amount that was recovered or identified. I mean, they were using this for lots of other things. And there was a whole bunch of other control weaknesses, but that was just one. When you find that one-time vendor that's not really one-time, when millions of dollars are being paid to that one-time vendor, that's an abuse of the system. And that's how you can extract money from it. There's also duplicates. I mean, simple things. This isn't compliance, it's just internal controls. Duplicates, we found payments getting paid by accounts payable and then also getting paid the same payment on the purchase card. Boom, $500,000. Go get your money back, you paid it twice. Stupid things like that. But that's just part of the benefit of just by monitoring, these will pay for themselves. If just the law of numbers, when you're dealing with hundreds of millions of dollars, there's bound to be errors, if not fraud. But then on the keep your business out of trouble side, how do you measure not getting sued? Well, just recently, there was a minerals and mining company that just settled with the DOJ. They got credit. Now I can't tell you how much credit, but they did get a non-prosecution agreement, and they specifically cited among about a dozen other factors of their maturity the fact that they were using continuous monitoring around third-party transactions and payments. And that was used this exact methodology. So there's a business case to be made by keeping the company out of trouble and making the business better, returning money in cash back on your balance sheet.
Yeah, thanks, Vince. It's interesting. I think of it in much the same way. There are the success stories that you know are success stories because you can measure them and you can see in real time that, for example, you've stopped an improper payment before it's gone through.
Those make my day.
Those are fantastic and we can measure them. But then there are success stories that you don't always know are success stories because you've kept the company out of trouble and nothing's happened. And those are great too, but they're harder to put your finger on. But I think an example of that is, so we do a lot of, in the wake of the Harvey Weinstein scandal, we now do a lot of Me Too investigations, so workplace conduct, sexual harassment, and a number of companies have hired us to come in and do proactive assessments of their workplace culture, which can be a tricky thing to do. But there's data that is very helpful in that space actually, and it's data that I think most companies probably have. And it's your whistleblower hotline, and it's your investigations tracker, and it's the complaints that come in. And so we often look at that data for trends, and it's pretty easy to do. You look at, where are there clusters of certain types of complaints throughout the country or throughout the world? Like, are there managers in common when you see people making complaints over and over? Are there places where there are more anonymous complaints than non-anonymous complaints? And what does that tell you about the culture in that place and people's fear of speaking up? And so we did a lot with that kind of data, and then we sent teams to different places throughout the country to do very targeted in-person sexual harassment and workplace conduct training. And hopefully coming from that are fewer incidents and, to your point about keeping the company out of trouble.
And what a great risk assessment that was,
Right.
because you have real data to know where to focus. And hey, these people need more training. That's cool.
Okay,
You're up.
my turn.
You're up.
Okay. This is my success story, I guess, an investigation. So it is about how, as an investigator, how we can be creative in the investigation. This means that we have to be creative to think about where we can apply the analytics or where we can apply the technology assisted review to make our life easier. So this is the case about product compliance scandals, which happened, quite a few times in Japan. And this client was trying very hard to go through line by line on Excel to find out where the product went. Could be China, US, Europe. So, they can eventually find out where the product went by going through line by line on Excel. But they are suffering so much because it's just hard, But by applying the data analytics to the supply chain data, which is massive, we can easily identify what product went to where, or what's the sort of general countries that those products went. So that basically made the client's life much easier by applying the analytics. So analytics can be applied anywhere, but we have to be very creative as an investigator.
That's what makes it so fun.
Yeah, it is.
It's a great profession.
Yeah, and I think these success stories are it's a really interesting mix of hearing about success stories in the context of investigations, culture reviews, money going out the door, product compliance. There's so many different areas where compliance matters and culture matters, and there's a lot of data out there to measure and that you can use in different ways. Cindy, hearing you talk about the Me Too and the culture investigations, a technology tool I've used in similar contexts has been to do online anonymous focus groups that sort of take your employee survey a level up, and you get sort of real-time interaction, almost like a focus group where you have people in the room, except they're able to stay anonymous. And it's something we've done in the culture space, particularly around discrimination and harassment, but I think is a tool that could be used in other compliance spaces as well when you want to look at your culture around speaking up and whistleblower system, and do people feel comfortable in the group reporting to a manager and asking questions around, we heard earlier from Jennifer and from Eugene about psychological safety, and so I think a lot of these topics can come together as you think about your data around culture and the effectiveness of your compliance program. In the same way, we're also using data to think about risks and where your risks are and where money is going, where products are going. And so and what you're seeing in your emails, I think is useful both for culture, but also for specific issues. So we have about 10 minutes left. I have a couple other questions I could ask the panel, but let me pause for a minute. Whenever I participate in or moderate panels on the use of data analytics, there's usually a lot of questions. So let me pause for a minute to see if we have any questions, because you've got a terrific experienced group here. And if not, I'll keep going.
Oh, if no one else, I'd rather someone else ask, but.
You asked a hard question last time on the last panel. That was impressive.
Well, one of the things I'm struck by, because, since we haven't met, I run the NYU program on corporate compliance and enforcement, so we do a lot of compliance events. And I also care deeply about academic institutions, strangely. And one of the things I've been struck with talking to compliance officers, who would be one of the main people who need to do data analytics, is how siloed companies are in their data. So you talk about them being siloed across different regions, but compliance doesn't always even get access to the whistleblower data. They definitely don't get HR data, which I'm obsessed with because I've internalized Eugene's studies on how unsubstantiated sexual harassment allegations are the biggest red flag of problems with, excess expenses, with corruption, with everything, right? Those people are going outside the lines with everything. They're not getting necessarily finance data, sales data. How do I figure out who's outperforming? That's worth looking at. So how do you all, when you're coming into data to do data analytics, one, convince companies to give you everything, and two, decide what everything is? I mean, how many of you are looking for the HR data to see if that'll help you identify issues? That's like 6 questions almost.
It's funny, can I comment, because I'm laughing. I write for Fraud Magazine, and I've been doing it for like 4 years. It's a hobby of mine. And you just nailed my January topic that I'm working on right now.
Well, I'm going to try to get you to do it for us, actually.
You're gonna talk, can I quote you?
I was going to get you to
Because
come up.
I'm struggling with it. It's hard. Breaking down these silos is such a pain. I call it not getting invited to a party. And I've seen so many, well, not so many, I got really frustrated ones. So I had a client, back in my consulting days, I had a client that we were doing this proactive compliance monitoring, and we mapped the risks, and we identified the data source, third-party risks. The company, this is a Fortune 20 company in the financial services space, they were going through an entire reprogramming of their third-party risk management and their third-party system. They were going to Coupa, and then changing their contract system and everything. Compliant, and it was IT, finance, even internal audit. And then I was doing my interviews to find the data sources and stuff, and they said, oh yeah, well, we're doing this huge initiative. Compliance was not even aware that they were changing their third-party management system. And it was like, my God. And no one thought to invite them to the party. And that was just a breakdown of that being siloed in information. And it kind of was sad. Because then all of a sudden they're like, oh, all those vendor questions, they were all like the Standard & Poor type questions, like what's your credit rating and how long have you been in business? Well, those are fine questions, but that doesn't help identify fraud and corruption risk, and it's a global company. And that, I don't have an answer other than, on the flip side, we saw great companies. I mean, we had our old colleague, back in the ABM days. I would see Matt Galvin travel like all the time. As Chief Compliance Officer, he would go to Latin America, Europe, everywhere, and he was just visible. And with his training programs, they even had T-shirts made, "Save the Cow." I mean, that was just, and it became a thing. He was a visible, and he wasn't like a police officer. He was viewed as a kind of helper of the business. And so it's really, if you're sitting in your office, again, just my observation, I haven't been a compliance officer, so I can't comment. But I would think that if you're sitting in your office for more than 200 days out of the year, you're probably not that effective as a compliance officer. You have to be out there. That's just again, I haven't been a compliance officer, I'm not a lawyer, but you gotta be visible. Any other, what are the thoughts?
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question, and I think it's so important to, I think a big issue is all this data exists, and sometimes like companies are just sitting on it, and maybe they don't even realize what's out there and what can be done with it, and that's not good for a number of reasons. And one big one is, I think, going back to the risk assessment. You can't appropriately assess your risks if you don't have access to all the data. So, I think it's so important for companies to understand how crucial that is. Another thing, and I think we probably heard about it earlier today, the SEC, DOJ, they're all using data analytics to bring cases. And so you don't want to have data that the government has access to that you're not at least doing the same thing or more than they're doing with it, because you're just going to be behind the 8 ball.
That happened a lot in Medicare.
Yeah. I have a non-data answer to your question, which I think relates to something you said, Vince, about being out and about and visible. I am a huge fan of cross-functional teams or spaces that you create on a regular basis where you have people in the room from, whether it's a compliance committee or maybe it's not a compliance committee because maybe you have something else if you want to put somebody else in the lead, but does compliance have a seat at the table in leadership meetings in their market if you're a big global multinational, and are they sitting at the table with HR and with internal audit and with finance? Because if compliance has a seat at the table and you sort of are bringing everybody together at a leadership level or a mid-level management level or sort of all of those levels, then you shouldn't have a scenario where there's a massive data transformation going on and compliance isn't aware of it, because that type of enormous project is going to get talked about among other people. That doesn't precisely solve the question of how does compliance get access to the HR data, are they looking at it, but at least being in the room with each HR, whether it's your triage committee looking at whistleblower complaints coming in, or it's just a quarterly meeting where HR and internal audit and compliance and legal and finance are all coming together to talk about risk.
That's a
You just
beautiful
need
thing.
to have the conversations, and then that sort of paves the way, I think, to getting the data. And Cindy, I don't know if you'll agree with me on this, lawyers aren't always the biggest help there, right? You got the privacy folks putting up their hands saying, no, you can't look at that, and no, you can't access that because we don't want to waive privilege. And you got to get people in the room who are creative about it and willing to think through and work through those issues and not just sort of reflexively say no, and everybody's got to give a little bit. But I think getting the right people in the room on a regular basis is at least a good first step.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, there was
No, go ahead.
Yeah, there was one company that, my client, that they want to sort of put together a team for, in case some emergency happens, like it could be a government investigation, it could be a litigation, whatever. So what they experienced the DOJ investigation, they had a very difficult time, not just external but internally. So they wanted to think about how they can effectively, treat those situations so that we provide the consulting to basically prepare the cross-functional team. The people from HR, people from IT, people from compliance, legal. So those people put together and create a sort of task force to be able to completely destroy the silo, and then they can basically access to the data that they want, or they can invite experts like councils and us to have access to the data. So that's actually quite successful. It can be very quick to handle the situation. It can be very efficient as well.
I saw a question.
Hi, so I guess my question is about the data analytics and the cliff that's coming. And so my example of the cliff is from my mentee from when I was in practice 15 years ago and my babysitter. So my mentor, when my mentee when I was in practice, I would email him, he was in junior high, and then he would never respond, and then the person in charge was like, you have to text him. And then my babysitter this summer, I was sending her like a schedule of dates, like, are you available on the following 10 dates? And then she says, oh, I don't check email. She's a college student at UNC, right? Oh, I don't check email, like, you have to text me. And my student group at Duke, oh, they wanted me to get on something called a group meet. And I was like, I don't know what that is, but I know I'm not getting on it with a bunch of students. And so it's great that you can go through all of these emails, but they're not gonna communicate on email because they're not communicating on email now. And so like, then how, I mean, so there's gonna be a cliff where you're not gonna be able to gather the information because that's just not gonna be where they're gonna communicate. So what do you think?
More young men are on.
DOJ is very focused
Right,
on
like,
that.
it's not-
Well, it's funny, no one, like, you think about the NAVX problem, like, you talk to Eugene Soltis about this, no one really, well, I am Gen X, yeah, I'm Gen X is my, I'm Gen X. I'm okay with calling a whistleblower hotline. A millennial or Gen Z is never, ever, ever, ever going to call and speak to a human on a whistleblower hotline. And if us Gen Zers in the room think that that's gonna happen, we are totally jading ourselves. They will text, they will chat, they will, or tell their friends, but they will IM or, WhatsApp it or, and so now most whistleblower tools have different ways. You're not gonna, who would wanna, you talk to a millennial or a Gen Zer and say, oh, I have to talk to a human, ew. I'm not gonna tell them my secret problem issue that I'm having. I'd much rather text it to somebody. And so your point that Cliff is spot on.
So I'd like to jump in. So I totally agree. So that's why we deal chat or text message as email, like similar. So we have supported a lot of like chat monitoring, not email, because a lot of companies, like especially under pandemic, they use a lot of chat communication, especially for like the younger generation. So, and sometimes, or maybe more often, we can find some evidence, not on the email, but more than chat message. And chat message investigation is more like complicated. Sometimes, especially for like younger generation, they use emoji frequently. And sometimes, even though they say exactly same thing, like with how to use emoji makes that sentence different. Like he's a good guy, like he's a good guy, or he's a good guy is completely different. But they can say that. So that's why like including the emoji, how to process correctly, how to search correctly is very important for like e-discovery vendor and forensic provider right now. So this is like really good trend. And
I know that was a legal argument. I think you've hosted. I've seen NYU. What is thumbs up or a smiley face when you just did a $1 billion transaction? Yes. Did that mean, yeah, I'm buying it? And was that letter of intent? I don't know. What's the legalities of an emoji? It's a great question. I don't have an answer.
Do we have time for one more question? I know we're over time.
No, we can.
Are we good? Okay.
Just a question about privacy, specifically talking about text messages. If you have faced any legal issues, if you can monitor or make this surveillance in a general way for all your employees, or if you have any resolution from the court about this?
Well, in the email world, what's your thoughts on that? I monitor transactions.
I'm happy to jump in on that. So, I think it depends on the jurisdiction, but, the off-systems communications cases that I was talking about earlier, where the SEC went out to, at this point, probably over 30 different financial institutions, and essentially had them take their employees' personal phones and count how many business-related text messages they had, and then tell the SEC how many business-related text messages they were. The reason they were able to do that is those companies all had, I think, BYOD, bring your own device policies, and as part of that, employees say, you know, if I use my device for work, then I'm obligated to, if the company needs my device for an investigation, I'll hand it over. So usually there's something in policies or, you know, BYOD contracts, and they were actually business-related communications. They weren't personal communications. Now they were mixed in with personal communications, which is the tricky thing, because it was their personal phone. And so what most of those financial institutions did was got pool counsel for their individual employees who were tasked with going through the personal phones and selecting only those that were business related to produce back to the financial institutions. And so only lawyers who represented only the individuals, not the company, were seeing their personal text messages. Now, it was extremely intrusive. The employees who had to go through that all hated it. You know, a lot of them kicked and screamed, as you can imagine, and talked about all their privacy concerns with having their phone imaged and looked at by a stranger. And so what a lot of institutions are doing now, particularly financial institutions that are subject to record-keeping requirements, is they're giving people company-issued devices and telling them to do all their business-related communications on those devices, and those texts, and even sometimes WhatsApp and WeChat, are like fed into the firm systems the same way that emails are. And so they're on there. And so I think in a lot of ways, what we might see is what I sometimes call back to the future, which is like back to the two phones. You know, you have your personal phone, you have your work phone. People don't like it because like,
Carrying two devices.
yeah, like you go to your kid's soccer game and you don't want to take a big bag and your phone is big. But I think people really hate having their, you know, anyone who's been through the experience of having their personal phone taken for work purposes, like that has gotten out there enough, I think, as a result of these SEC sweeps, that like people, at least in those regulated industries, are aware of it and are happy to go to the two devices to avoid something like that.
Well, thank you so much for this terrific panel. Thank you so much to the embassy, to Lucy Sensei, to Shinjuku University, and to everybody who planned this terrific day. I think we can all say it was an honor to be part of it and to be on the last panel. And I know there are some closing remarks. This isn't quite that, but this is the end of the panels.
Thank you.